to lie, setting fire to the sky. Here comes this rising tide. So
well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am your host, Suzanne Sherman, and you have tuned into the Renegade Ramblers Radio Network, 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers. We have a phone line. We're live, 717-467-1736. You can find us at Facebook, facebook.com/Renegade Rambler Radio Network. We have an R3N fan page as well. You can also follow me, facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire. The debate on my page this past week has been lively, to say the least, so feel free to take a peek and chime on in. We also have a free app. Once you get there, it is for Android devices. You can listen to any of our shows. You can hear live. You can check out some of the podcasts we have. We have the Brush Fires of Freedom show that is from Tucson, Arizona. Our good friend Sean Hoffine. You can hear his shows that are rebroadcast through us. We have Mike Meharry's podcast. He is the communications director for the 10th Amendment Center. I say all the time, if you spend about a half a day perusing the 10th Amendment Center's articles on their webpage, 10thamendmentcenter.com, you will know more about our system of federalism than any federal judge presently sitting on the bench today. I have a very special guest today. His name's John Roberts. He is a proprietor of Survival Medical, and I'm going to bring him on momentarily, but I want to update you quickly with a story that was out of Utah. This had national, pardon my French, attention, and that was with Nurse Webel at the Utah Nurse. It was the University of Utah Hospital. She justifiably prevented a police officer from collecting blood from an unconscious patient. Here's the update. Hospital patient who a Utah nurse said was protecting when she refused to allow the police to draw blood. Unfortunately, he has passed away. William Gray was a commercial truck driver. He was also a reserve police officer. He passed away Monday night of the injuries he suffered in a fiery crash. This occurred on July 26. It left him with burns over nearly half of his body. He was unconscious at the hospital when police detective Jeff Payne tried to draw his blood hours after the crash. The police actually have a blood draw unit, which I find a bit I find that very creepy. Getting back to the story, though, Nurse Alex Webbles, refused because the hospital policy required a warrant or patient consent, or that the patient actually be under arrest. So there were 3 criteria that needed to be met. None of them were. For standing up for hospital policies and her patients' rights, she was arrested for her trouble. Gray, the deceased, was hauling a load of sand in northern Utah when a pickup truck speeding away from police crossed the center line and hit his truck head on, causing an explosion. The state police have been trying to pull over the pickup driver after several people called in to report an erratic driver. He was not suspected of wrongdoing. That was Gray, the truck driver. Marco Torres was the gentleman driving the vehicle trying to elude police. And the police routinely collect evidence from anybody involved in a fatal crash. The video has caught widespread attention, the video of Webel's arrest, that is. And Payne and the supervisor who backed him, Lieutenant James Tracy, were placed on leave, pursuant to some, or pending an investigation. Also, a development is now the hospital policy has changed so that the police will not be interacting with the nurses on duty. So Gray was 43. He served with the police in southeastern Idaho City. The chief, Sam Tower, said that he was dedicated to the community of 4,000 people. He plowed snow from a sidewalk last winter so neighborhood kids wouldn't have to walk in the street. And the police chief Towers thanked Webbles for her efforts to protect his rights and prevent his blood from being drawn. We discussed the possible motives for this attempt on another show. We're not going to revisit that today, but I wanted to give you an update because one of the other friends of ours out here in Utah from Prepper Talk Radio, I believe it was Scott Stallings, had come across an overturned vehicle out here in Utah in his part of town and is his part of the state. And he was the first responder, the immediate responder there. He was first on the scene, and there were other cars as well. People had pulled over to assist, and he was the only one that had a first aid kit in his vehicle. First aid kits do not have to be burdensome. They don't have to be cumbersome or take up a lot of space in your vehicle. It's something everybody should have. I don't like to turn prepper related topics into infomercials, but at the same time, if there is a viable option and a means by which you can be prepared, that I'm certainly going to share that product and the company who makes that available with my listeners. That being said, John Roberts, I want to welcome you to the Wasatch Report.
Hey, Suzanne, thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having us, and thanks for everything you do, keeping all of your listeners, including myself, informed and educated about what's going on around us. I appreciate all your hard work there.
Well, thank you very much. You know, we met, I was able to see your products firsthand at the outdoor exhibition a few months ago over the summer, and I was very, very impressed. Well, let's talk a little bit, you know, also given the incident, the unfortunate tragedy we had yesterday in Las Vegas. I am a big proponent of carrying a first aid kit anywhere you go. And our producer and founder of the network, who's also here lurking in the background, Jeff Johnson, also has EMT training, as a former EMT. So we are all on the same page in this regard. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between a first responder, which we consider that to be somebody that is official. So the EMTs, the fire department, police are first on the scene, but we also have immediate responders. Why don't you get into the difference of those?
Well, you broke up just a little bit there, but I think what I caught is, you know, what's important to realize, especially, you know, yesterday really points this out, is the people on the scene were the first responders. You saw in pictures there, a whole lot of people walking, or a lot of men walking around without shirts, which brings to mind, you know, immediately, obviously, they were taking off their shirts and using it to apply pressure or maybe make a makeshift tourniquet. And one thing that's for certain is most of the time, a good guy with a gun can help stop a bad guy with a gun. Yesterday would have proved that differently. Sometimes you just can't stop a madman that's thought his evil plans out that way. But however, you know, if every concealed carry permit holder, or everyone that chose to constitutional carry also carried a tourniquet, the lives that could have been saved. You know, tourniquet is something very small, very simple, that could have saved a whole lot of lives. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Don't get me wrong. You know, there was definitely injuries, you know, and things that happened yesterday that wouldn't have mattered if they had happened in the middle of, you know, a hospital. You know, there was terrible carnage that happened, but a lot of that could have been stopped. A lot of lives could have been saved, you know, with some tourniquets. This is something that, you know, I'm the first to admit I need to be better about carrying that kind of thing in my pocket all the time. I know you mentioned Shane and Scott there from Prepper Talk. I know if you pocket check Shane any day of the week, anywhere he's at, it doesn't matter if he's sitting in a church pew, he's going to have his rat's tourniquet on him.
Yeah, did you want to
takes up just a small amount of space? And
yeah, I mean,
I want to jump in. This is Jeff Johnson. Oh, I'm sorry, Suzanne. I didn't mean to bunt. I'm producing your show, and I'm going to jump in. I'm sorry, John. I just wanted to jump in and say that everywhere I go in my vehicle, and on my person, whether it's hunting, I have an IFAC set up with. And Suzanne and I have talked in the past about IFACs and an individual first aid kit. In which I have tourniquets and other items. And so it is a very important thing, and something that someone could have carried into that event last night, not because you're expecting something, but because you're prepared for something.
That's right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you know, I carry to varying degrees, and I guess yesterday was a good moment for me to stop and reflect about what I prepare for. You know, with our first aid kits, we offer a different kit with survival medical, you know, really kind of tailored on the activity. And I find myself most of the time a first aid kit that I'll have on me or in my pack or in my car is likely, I've got there's trauma things in there, but it's also a lot of times small things can become trauma if they're not taken care of in a sense. And so it made me think yesterday more of, having some of these things like a tourniquet, a good tourniquet, and good pressure bandages. I'm good about keeping the Israeli bandage, that kind of stuff around it. Really, honestly, it made me just stop and pause about the saving power of a tourniquet. In those kind of instances, that's what would allow you to really have the most impact and help in that kind of situation. You can apply a rat's tourniquet or a SWAT T tourniquet or a cat tourniquet and go on to the next tragedy there and see what you can do to assist. Whereas if I just had a pressure bandage, in order for that to be truly effective, I'd have to stay there with it and keep applying pressure. So it really did make me reassess some of those things.
Well, and I think people might think, well, it's really extreme to think that if you're going to a concert, why would you want to bring a tourniquet and have all these items with you? But again, when you think of the cost or the inconvenience of having something that would literally fit in your pocket or even your wallet that could save a life, why would you not why would you not carry that with you? Also, if you're in a vehicle and you're driving and you have a significant accident, blood loss might be a very real risk, and somebody could handle that situation if you have the proper equipment for you. As I look on your webpage, the first thing I see is it says that your kits are tougher than nature. So you have options for going out in the wilderness, for going in your car. You even have a birthing bucket. Let's talk a little bit about the options you have. I see bucket kits, preparedness kits, outdoorsman kits. Jeff, you mentioned hunting. It's so important because when we are out there hunting, you could deal with a gunshot wound, you could deal with a knife wound. When we are cutting up those animals, field dressing, we are dealing with some very, very sharp knives. Oftentimes we're in extremely cold weather. We're dealing with blood. It can get slippery. You can get a significant injury out there. You also have marine kits. Let's have you get into these for a few minutes.
Sure, absolutely. Basically, I guess I'll back up to where the beginning of this, and that was, when Survival Medical really kind of started as a preparedness company. Good business, you evolve and change along the way with what you learn. But we started a lot with just the concept of preparedness in the sense of, when I saw, it used to be, 1996. Number one, we were survivalists, not preppers. That word hadn't been coined yet. And, we were this small group that, existed in the shadows. And then somewhere along the line in the last decade, it became a mainstream thing. And, and you see these awesome events like PrepperCon start popping across the country. And as I saw all this happen and the rise of preparedness movement, you go and you see all these new startup companies that were happening because of this growing industry. I saw a whole lot of really awesome food storage products. There's, heck, all of a sudden it went from 2 or 3 to 20 or 30. And then you saw a whole lot of awesome tactical products. And in my preparedness mind of thinking, I've always believed in the 3 Bs, beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. And as I looked around, I saw this big on the first aid side of things. What I mean by that is I saw some awesome first aid kits, some awesome trauma bags. But the problem is, when it comes to medical supplies, you have to rotate those things in order for them to stay effective. And it's something that we're really not aware of until you stop and think about it. But I guarantee as a mom, you've gone to get some burn cream and you pulled the burn cream out and it wasn't burn cream anymore. It was now burn dust. I'm sure that's happened.
Or the Band-Aid
still stick. Probably pulled out a Band-Aid. Exactly. You pull out a Band-Aid that doesn't stick, right? And so most people don't generally think about the short-term shelf life of their first aid supplies. I mean, even your cotton gauze, depending on where and how it's stored, you've got anywhere from about a 2-year to a 10-year shelf life, traditionally, depending on how it's stored. The same things destroy food or any organic matter will break down, your medical supplies, heat, light, oxygen, and moisture. And so I wanted to create a packaging system that would, give your first aid supplies the same kind of shelf life that we saw in food storage, where as a prepper or just someone being prepared, you can take, and buy this product once, stick it on your shelf, and know that, okay, hey, I've got X amount of medical supplies and they're going to be good when I need them because they're protected from those things: heat, light, oxygen, and moisture. And that was really the concept. And then from there, we got more specialized in the sense of, let's think about a specific person in a specific place doing a specific thing. What would they need? And what wouldn't they need, right? Because sometimes we can pack things we don't need, and that can become a problem. And so I think we want to be effective, because a lot of first aid kits are really just this big, broad net that really don't do a whole lot for anyone. If a Band-Aid fixes your first aid problem, you didn't really have a problem. You had a scrape.
Exactly.
So that's really the kit, the idea behind it there. And we just got more and more specific, and we continue to do so. I mean, you brought up Officer Gray, for instance. We were working with Chief Powers there in Rigby. Rigby's actually the headquarters of Survival Medical. It's where our offices and warehouses are. And we actually met Chief Powers came by and was asking us to specialize a trauma kit for his police department. And I met him for the first time maybe a week or so before Officer Gray's accident. And I'll tell you what, Suzanne, Chief Powers is a fantastic guy. It's a tragedy what happened to Officer Gray. At the same time, it was a proud moment to be a citizen of Rigby, Idaho, and to know Chief Powers, to see him stand up for what was right in that situation. And I wouldn't feel right having the introduction without acknowledging that, because, the law enforcement circles, I'm sure it was very hard for him to stand up for that, and not feel like he was betraying one of his brothers in law enforcement. And when I acknowledged that to him, I dropped off his kits and for his police department there that we had specialized for him, and said, hey, I told him, I said, look, I just want to help. I appreciate what you're doing. This is on the house. And I said, thank you, and thanked him for standing up for the cause that he stood up for there. And he looked me in the eye almost with confusion and said, John, I was just doing what's right.
Well, and that's exactly right.
It was awesome. Man.
Well, as you mentioned, I thought it was very courageous as I was reading that article as well, because as you know, he was bucking that brotherhood there. And what the police officers, the detective in Utah were trying to do was absolutely unconscionable, and he stood up for the nurse. He absolutely did what was right. I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to just revisit, before I let you go, if you could stick around for one break, I want to revisit the issue of tailoring our supplies and our kits, and then I'll let you get on with your day. Can you stick around for the break?
You bet, Suzanne. You bet.
All right, everybody, this is the Wasatch Report. I also want to encourage you to check out Craig Bowden, Libertarian for U.S. Senate. We're trying to raise money for his campaign. It is time to send Orrin Hatch home. This is the Wasatch Report. Suzanne Sherman. We'll be back right after this break.
Sweet a thigh, hurroo, hurroo. On the road to sweet a thigh, a stick in the hand, a drop in the eye, a doleful damsel I did cry. Johnny, I hardly knew ya.
Looking for a new custom camo dress or scarf? Tail Gunner Apparel. Looking for bath and body products for women and men? Tail Gunner Apparel. Looking for bed scarves and custom home products? Tail Gunner Apparel. Look awesome and feel even better. Tail Gunner Apparel on Facebook or at tailgunnerapparel.etsy.com. That's tailgunnerapparel.etsy.com.
Made love and then you cried. Remember when?
Renegade Ramblers Radio Network. 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers.
You're as cold as ice. You're willing to sacrifice our love. You never take advice. Someday you'll pay the price.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the second segment of the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman. You've tuned into the Renegade Rambler Radio Network, 18th Century Ideas for 21st Century Thinkers. Joining me on the line right now is John Roberts, the proprietor of Survival Medical supplies, long-term survival medical kits that are tougher than nature. They are made to last the duration. They are made to not fail you when you need them the most. John, I want people to know how they can reach you, how they can follow you and order your products. Before that, just tell me again briefly, how are your products broken down? What should people have? And do you have products that are more portable and something to keep in the house that are maybe broader in scope?
Absolutely. So, when you go to our website, survival-medical.com, where at the moment, for the rest of this month, you can still buy individual items. However, come the end of October, we will be discontinuing selling direct to the public. But you can find our products at Cabela's, Bass Pro. In 2018, you'll be able to find us on Walmart shelves. And you will always be able to email us there, info@survival-medical.com, if you have a large family or large group or anything like that you'd like to customize an order on. But as far as the specific kit, so the first product Survival Medical ever made was our Alpha Bucket. And what I wanted to do there with this product was I wanted to create a product that would be your basic commodity medical supply needs for your average family's preparedness plans. And that's what the Alpha Bucket is. It all comes in a 6-gallon super pail with a Gamma Seal lid, and then there's 6 individually bagged kits inside of it. There's a injury kit for sprains, strains, that sort of thing. Your bleeder kit is obviously for hemorrhaging. The wound kit is probably the largest kit inside of it because there's just massive amounts of dressings. A lot of times people don't realize, unless they've been through some type of medical experience, the sheer amount of clean dressings it takes to take care of a small wound. When you think about a preparedness situation, infections are going to become a very, very serious and deadly thing when there's not readily available antibiotics everywhere. And a pound of prevention, is going to be the best thing there. And the best way to prevent that, in my opinion, is going to be clean dressings and changing them often. And so there's a lot of those. Very expensive burn kit in there. I think burns is something that we can't be prepared enough for when we're thinking about preparedness situation. I don't cook with wood fire right now. So when I want to turn on some lights, I flip a switch. I don't have a fire burning. Those kind of things are going to be more prevalent in a preparedness situation. So,
also getting back
to see more of those burns, I believe. So we've got a
getting back to a preparedness situation, because even just day-to-day preparedness, we also have to think long-term. What if there is a survival situation? We are preppers. We also have to take into account this contingency, long-term preparedness. Joe Alton has been on my other show, also known as Dr. Bones in the survival community. And he had told me on my show that if you're in a long-term collapse or survival situation, and medical help is not available, you better be prepared to deliver a baby. And you have a baby bucket. And the other thing is, my son and I yesterday were having a conversation actually about longevity and what it was like 100 years or so, 200 years ago. What did most people die of? We didn't see a lot of people dying of cancer back then, but what we really did experience were people dying of the very things that you just mentioned now: injuries, bleeds, wounds, burns, when infections could take over. We didn't even understand the concept. For instance, in the quote Civil War, many of the people that were operated on, they didn't understand the concept of sterilization. So like you said, an ounce of prevention will prevent deaths in long-term situations. I want to thank you, John, for joining me on the show today. Everybody, Survival Medical, go to their website, get them while you can. This is a significant development for you, by the way. I understand now your products are available at Walmart, Cabela's, and where else?
Sportsman's Warehouse you'll see come spring. Now that the Cabela's and Bass Pro merger has been given its blessing by the king, we'll also likely be in the Bass Pro shops as well, since they're one of the same company now. But yeah, and then there's you name it. If it's a preparedness store and anywhere like that, you're likely going to see Survival Medical on the shelf. If you don't, ask the purveyor of that store why not. As you know, there's a kit for every need, whether you're an outdoorsman, a fisherman, or like you said, home birth is a big one. A lot of times people don't realize how much the birth rate goes up in any type of emergency. There's really two things that people do to comfort themselves and when they're stressed out, and one of them is eat cake, and the other one makes babies. So anytime there's an emergency around the world, you see that birth rate spike up, and you can deliver a baby at home with a pocket knife and a warm bucket of water, but it's all about comfort and sanitation, right? And
Absolutely.
Stress, especially in a home birth situation, being able to make mom comfortable and reduce that stress is going to be able to reduce stress on baby, and everything ends up a lot better. And that all comes down to comfort, really, and preparedness. Ask any mom or any dad that's been there while mom's getting ready to have a baby, whether it's at home or a hospital. This nesting happens, and she feels like she needs to clean and get ready, and just being able to have those supplies is going to do a lot for the mental well-being there, even if you don't end up using them.
It's not just about surviving, it's about being comfortable. And eventually, if you're prepared enough, you can also thrive in a situation like this. John, I want to thank you for joining me today. Survival Medical, everybody. Well, Jeff, that's
Thank
a
you,
topic
Suzanne.
that's
I sure
near.
appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. We'll have you on again. So, Jeff, that's a topic that's near and dear to someone like you that's an EMT. Do you have Israeli bandages, tourniquets in your hunting bag?
For those who are watching on YouTube, I'm in my hand is my IFAK, and it's a chair away, and I keep it on the center of my belt, so I can reach right hand and left hand. If I'm injured, I can unsnap it, and then I grab this handle and tear it away, and all my trauma needs are in here. And it's not very big; it's just a small little bag. I mean, the camera makes it look a lot bigger than it really is. I mean, I don't have very big hands, and you look at my hand, it gives you pretty much a good idea of the size of it and everything I need for trauma. And this is a trauma thing. So when hunting or whatever, it's for trauma. It's not for Band-Aid. It doesn't have Band-Aids in it. So if I would fall on my tree and have an open compound fracture, I have the bandages and other things in here and a tourniquet and those things needed to help myself survive the bad situation until help can get there to me. And that's what this is all about. And that's what I appreciate John being on here, because I'm not going to go over the details, what's in here. We can talk about that another day if you wish, but that's my IFAK. It's not very big. And that's something I can carry. If I went to that concert, I could carry something this size. It's no bigger than a fanny pack.
And you have to consider,
they would have to check it. But.
Yeah, in a situation like this where you have mass casualties, the system, the ability for the responders, they're going to be overwhelmed. So if everybody could just help a little bit, it would make the situation much more survivable for many people. I want to change gears, Jeff. What I really like about having our shows back to back is we can continue discussions from one another's shows. And when I mentioned earlier, my Facebook page has been very lively, to say the least, the last week or two. I've been discussing nationalism versus patriotism, carrying over from the drama from the National Football League and the spoiled players taking a knee to protest the fact that they are feeling that blacks are being treated unfairly by police officers, whatever their reason. I said last week on the show, this is not a First Amendment issue. It is an issue between an employer and an employee. You don't like what they're doing and behavior that's sanctioned by the National Football League, then your solution is to simply not watch. But what I have been saying, which made people very upset with me on our supposed right side, is that those that are triggered by seeing people do something that they simply don't agree with are no better than those that are upset over seeing statues of generals from days gone by. And people don't like to talk about that. I keep my message very simple. If you're doing something that is not harming another person, you should just simply leave that person be. But where these people draw the line, and I think it was very disturbing, were the comments I was seeing, sadly, by many veterans who say this flag, if you disrespect our flag, or if you do not stand up for this anthem, you are disrespecting those who have fallen and who have sacrificed. And my question to that is, are we really? Or is that really something that's subjective, particularly the responses that were of note where I was handed a flag. You've never been handed a flag of that has come, when a lost one that has died has come home in a coffin. This flag has been on there. No, that's truly a devastating situation. What I was trying to say when I refer to the flag as a piece of cloth, I said, look, what this flag means to you is personal. It is a subjective feeling. It is personal to you. So clearly, if a flag has been folded and handed to you because you've lost somebody, that flag is truly significant. I dare to say sacred to you. A flag that I can just pick up off the shelf, made in China, never unwrapped before from the plastic where it came from, to me is a fungible item. It can be replaced by one just like it. It is not one that's been in a protective case that was historic in nature, that has been in a significant battle. For instance, look at the flag, the Star-Spangled Banner, that is in the Smithsonian Institute that flew over Fort McHenry. That is a significant flag. But to say that all flags have this elevated status of being sacred. I heard one person just compared it to the flesh of Christ in communion. This, Jeff, tell me, we don't worship government when we hear comments like that, when it's elevated to the status of something sacred. So to just say, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just going to agree with you that we have come to this point where if you speak against the symbolism, and that's what we're talking about, I've really come to believe that we've made it an idol. It's worshipped. We have to sing a hymn to it before any event. We have to put our hand on our heart and pledge our allegiance to it. I don't recall ever a founding father calling for us to have a pledge of allegiance to the general government. I just don't. I've never seen a writing. Even the Federalists, the ones I think are nationalists, I've never seen a writing where they called for something like that. Well,
and this is the thing, and when I bring up the subject, a lot of these people will say, I support the flag, I support our Constitution. I said it's inherently self-contradictory to say that you support the Constitution, you took an oath to uphold the Constitution, then at the same time claim that those sacrificed so we could be one nation and refer to us as one nation. Because as we know, and as you were discussing in your show the previous hour, 13 sovereign and independent nations came together and formed a compact, a voluntary union from which they could secede, leave at any time of their choosing. And this message has been ignored. And I ask people, how do you reconcile this sentiment with our factual history? You can't make sense of this. And they said, well, to me, this is what the flag means. But you're not getting a logical, historically accurate discussion on this subject. And everything is, this is what the flag means to me. And that's fine. It can mean that to you. But what is disturbing, again, are the comments that I see where veterans in particular say, if I see you burning that flag, you will get a beat down, not because it's legal, but because it's just the right thing to do. And my question, which got so many people upset, was how can you make the claim that you have gone there overseas to fight for our freedoms, to fight for our rights, when then you claim the right to be the judgment of what is respectful, what is not, what is acceptable behavior, by allowing yourself the right to physically harm somebody that is engaging in an activity that does not harm you, but that you find offensive. Then what resulted in a nuclear mushroom cloud over my Facebook page was, I said, this is the same behavior Antifa engages in. You are silencing the message of another because you disagree with it, and you are using violence to silence them. They were apoplectic over that. Jeff, do you think it's really a stretch to make that assertion? Am I just out there?
No, because I think the other day I made a similar assertion on my show. I didn't equate them to Antifa, but I did say that whether it's on the right or it's on the left, you are seeing now that they have something very much in common, the left and the right, whether it's Antifa or the alt-right or anything in between. What you're seeing is a group of people that are willing to use this power of government, the threat of force, to quiet people that they don't agree with. Okay, so you don't like the fact that they're kneeling for the national anthem? Fine. Let's have the president call for them to be fired. Let's have them lose their job. Okay, again, this is a work-related matter. That is the employer's prerogative. I say that all along. If an employer there says you're going to stand for the national anthem, and his player doesn't stand, he can fire them. It is a job action. But what you have is a president saying, and I intended to have the soundbite from my show saying that we need to do something that they shouldn't be allowed to dishonor our flag or our country. So he wants to use government, Trump does, and these on the right and the left want to use government to do something to stop people from doing something they don't agree with. And so in that case, no, you're not off the base. I just didn't go as far as calling him Antifa, but it fits. Antifa does the exact same thing. Again, they're on the left. They want government. They want to use force, and that's what this guy was saying. He would use force to kick your butt because you dishonor the flag. They both want to use the same thing, force or government, to stop people that they disagree with.
And yeah, exactly. And here I have a quote here. Patriotism is not obedience to government. Patriotism is obedience to the principles for which government is supposed to stand. In the next segment, I'm going to compare and contrast patriotism and nationalism. I found an article written by George Orwell in 1945. It's very long, but I've taken out a few excerpts, which is absolutely spot on and relevant today. We will revisit that after the break. This is the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman on the Renegade Rambler Radio Network, 18th Century Ideas for 21st Century Thinkers.
Paul, are these two men in the middle insufficiently conservative for you?
Well, I think the problem is nobody's to define what being conservative means. And I think that is our problem. Conservative means we have smaller government and more liberty. And yet, if you ask what have we done, I think we've lost our way completely. Our rhetoric is still pretty good. But when we get in charge, we expand the government. You talk about Dodd-Frank, but we gave Sarbanes-Oxley. We gave debts as well, you know, when we're in charge. So if it means limited government, you have to ask a basic question: what should the role of government be? The founders asked that question, had a revolution, wrote a constitution. And they said the role of government ought to be to protect liberty. It's not to run a welfare state and not to be the policeman of the world. And so if you're going to conservative, how can you be conservative and cut food stamps, but you won't cut spending overseas? There's not a nickel or penny that anybody will cut on the conservative side overseas spending. And we don't have the money. They're willing to start more wars. So I say if you're conservative, you want small government across the board, especially in personal liberty. What's wrong with having the government out of our personal lives? So this is what we have to decide: what conservative means, what limited government means. And I have a simple suggestion. We have a pretty good guide, and if we follow the Constitution, government would be very small, and we would all be devoted conservatives.
Renegade Ramblers Radio Network, 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers.
Welcome back, everybody, to the third and final segment of the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman, and you have tuned into the Renegade Ramblers Radio Network, 18th Century Ideas for 21st Century Thinkers. We are about limited government. Speaking of limited government, I want to refer to you to Craig Bowden for U.S. Senate. We're trying to retire Orrin Hatch. She is a libertarian candidate and very much in conformance to the principles upon which we were founded. I'm going to be having him on the show again very soon. When we left off at the last segment before the break, we were talking about nationalism. Is nationalism and patriotism the same thing? When you put your hands on your heart and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, are you being a patriot? I said that I had referred to a quote that being a patriot does not mean being loyal to your government. It means adhering to the principles upon which your particular government was founded. And in our case, we were founded on the principles that we were a compact, a union that was voluntarily entered into by 13 sovereign and independent nations, or as Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, these colonies ought to be free and independent states being on the par of what we considered nations, on par of England, France, Spain at the time. I found an article that was written in 1945 by George Orwell, and he discusses nationalism. It's a very long article. I'll post the link. If you are so inclined, you can read it on your own, but I took a few excerpts out, and I thought in the time we had remaining, I would compare that to how history has been treated up till now, and also how people are behaving with regards to some of these issues. I don't care if it is football players taking a stand, somebody burning a flag, or the response to a mass shooting incident, which we always tend to look to this national government as opposed to federalism. Let me get to the Orwell article here. By nationalism, and this is him now, I mean the habit, of identifying oneself with a single nation or other unit, placing it beyond good and evil, and recognizing no other duty than that of advancing its interests. Nationalism is not to be confused with patriotism. Both words are normally used in so vague a way that any definition is liable to be challenged, but one must draw a distinction between them, since two different and even opposing ideas are involved. By patriotism, I mean devotion to a particular place and a particular way of life, one which believes to be the best in the world, but, and this is crucial here, has no wish to force on other people. Patriotism is of its nature defensive, both militarily and culturally. Nationalism, on the other hand, is inseparable from the desire for power. The abiding purpose of every nationalist is to secure more power and more prestige, not for himself, but for the nation or other unit in which he has chosen to sink his own individuality. Jeff, I stumbled across this and I found it profound. When we talk about, or when he talks about how the two terms are confused, I like to go and prove these points with regards to even federal and national. I look up, what do people go to? What's their source when they want to find out what something means? Well, you can go to dictionary.com. So I put in patriot, a person who loves, supports, and defends his or her country and its interests with devotion. Here's another definition under the same term. A person who regards himself or herself, got to get the genders right, as a defender, especially of individual rights, against presumed interference by a federal government. Now, if you listen to those terms, those are exclusive. The first one really defines a nationalist. The second one is a patriot. Are you getting that from what I'm saying, Jeff?
Oh, yeah, I agree. I think that you would find that Patrick Henry was he was patriotic. But again, to what was he patriotic? He was patriotic to his country. Again, it was the state. Which state? Who had the Constitution first? Virginia or these United States? Well, of course, Virginia. So they were a state, a country before these United States ended up becoming a nation.
What I found really profound here was how he distinguishes patriotism versus nationalism. When he says patriotism is of its nature defensive, militarily and culturally. Now, when we talk about nationalism, compare our justifications for wars. I recall George W. Bush. We are spreading democracy. We are fighting for freedom around the world. And this is a common sentiment, that we are somehow going to impose our standards on the rest of the world. That is the definition of nationalism. This is why also the founding generation had a fear of standing armies. They said it was the bane of liberty. Go forward now, over 80 years, what did Robert E. Lee said? Well, now we're forced with an impending national government as a result of this war, Lincoln's War. He feared that a powerful central government would bring about despotism, tyranny at home, and despotism abroad. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. We are seeing these wars that are never ending. They are non-defensive. We are seeing an absolute abolishment of the federalist system that we were granted when the Constitution was drafted. I think it was a Trojan horse. Patrick Henry smelled a rat. And you had asked in your show earlier, are we happier today than we were under the Articles? Why, my response to that was, well, it depends on who you asked. What I'm going to do in a future show is break down. Kevin Gutzman has done a series of speeches and presentations for Federalist societies at various law schools around the country, and I've seen a few of them. Chicago, last week, 2 of them in Kansas. And the topic of the conversation is, whose Constitution do we have today? Is it the one that was promised and guaranteed and henceforth, as reliance on those promises, ratified by the state constitutional ratification conventions? Or do we have a constitution that has now been hijacked by the federal judiciary, these unelected, unaccountable, appointed for life federal judges? I submit to you it is the latter. When you ask me who's happier, I said, well, it depends on who you ask, because the common sentiment, if you're a progressive, is we like it this way because the Constitution's old and it should be disregarded. But I'm going to break that apart a little bit more later in another show, and I can really address all the issues. But getting back to Orwell's article, he also says nationalism is power hunger tempered by self-deception. Every nationalist is capable of the most flagrant dishonesty, but he is also, since he is conscious of serving something bigger than himself, unshakably certain of his being in the right. Jeff, I can think of no more flagrant example of this sentiment than being the war of northern aggression or the war against southern independence. You might say the North wasn't being aggressive, but you cannot in good conscience say that this was not a war against southern independence. When the Constitution was ratified, Virginia, Rhode Island, and New York reserved specifically the right to leave this voluntary union should this government no longer fulfill their needs, as sentiment expressed in the Declaration of Independence. When people say that these documents are unrelated, have nothing to do with each other, I disagree. These sentiments carry through with why it was ratified. Because 3 states reserved this right to secede at a time of their choosing under the equal footing doctrine, this premise, this reservation applied to all of them. So this is what we're left with. And what you'll hear now when we talk about this war was that the states surrendered their sovereignty at the time they ratified the Constitution. It became a union that was going to be perpetual. They lie about what perpetual meant. Perpetual meant that you never had to renew it, but you could also leave at the same time. We see lies again and again and again over our history. And this goes back to, again, they have this feeling that they are unshakably certain of being in the right, notwithstanding the fact that the history is available now with the internet of being available to them at their fingertips. He also says here, as nearly as possible, no nationalist ever thinks, talks, or writes about anything except the superiority of his own power unit. Again, we are going to bond these people into democracy. It is difficult, if not impossible, for any nationalist to conceal his allegiance. The smallest slur upon his own unit or any implied praise of a rival organization fills him with uneasiness, which he can relieve only by making some sharp retort. If I see somebody disrespecting this flag, I will beat them down because it is the right thing to do. Jeff, I find this profoundly accurate, even though this was written in 1945.
Orwell obviously got it back then. And today, again, we are seeing where people are quite comfortable using government to do what they want them to do, even on the supposed right side. And I want to go back to something you said just a minute ago. I want to go to the Declaration of Independence. In the very first paragraph, it says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. 3 states left it there that they could secede. They put it in writing. Did that mean the other ones didn't have it because they didn't put it in writing? No, because it was a natural right. And that's exactly what Jefferson was saying here, is that by natural law and God, and the law of nature's God, they had that right inherent in them to secede. And that's what he later said at the end of this, in the last paragraph, when they actually had the secession statement. But that we still have it today, is what I'm getting with this. Nothing has changed. Even though it's not written down today, it is a natural right. We have the right to self-determination. It hasn't changed in 200 years simply because now it's the 21st century. This 18th century principle still applies today.
And I think that's what I love so much about our premise here. I try to tell people that many of the solutions to our current dilemmas can be at least honestly discussed if we look at the way that they were approached back then. because they understood at the time, with just a fraction of the population that we have right now, that we could never come together as one. And this is Donald Trump yesterday. He was highly praised for soothing the soul of America and everybody's feelings. Well, it's not his job, but I guess everybody expects him to chime in. For me, this is a local matter. The first thing he said was the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security were assisting in this matter. And this is what everybody wants. They want to look to this national government. Again, with regards to terms, look up in dictionary.com, national and federal, and oftentimes you will see that they're discussed as being synonymous with one another. And when you talked about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, the Federalists were really the nationalists, the Anti-Federalists were the Federalists. So words have meaning, but because it has been diluted and people just don't understand what they really are anymore. And that's how we get this feeling, this nationalist feeling. And then you combine that with the unshakable resolve that, of course, they are right. Talk to somebody about the Pledge of Allegiance. You can tell them historically the significance of Francis Bellamy, that he was a socialist, that the principles set forth in the Pledge of Allegiance are in direct contravention to our founding principles, and you will be met with, well, to me, this is what it means. Well, to me, it stands for respect of our flag and those that have fallen. So again, we're met with these emotional, sentimental, personal responses. They're all subjective that completely ignore the unemotional, detached examination of the facts. And if we stick to those facts, we can come with solutions. Because again, do we really want a national solution to how we can carry our firearms concealed? Do we really want a national solution when it comes to our medical care, which we're seeing now? And again, nobody's trying, we don't see on the national discussion scaling back and getting government completely out. It's how they're going to allow states, for instance, to sell insurance across state lines. This is never within the parameters of the government, but nobody's really saying we need to get you out of there completely. Yes, some of us are discussing it, but nobody in Washington is seriously having that conversation. But this is the problem when we just embrace nationalism. It doesn't help us overseas. It doesn't help us certainly at home. And we fought very hard, as you mentioned earlier, during the Philadelphia Convention, when James Madison and Edmund Randolph proposed the Virginia plan. It was rejected outright. We're going to be continuing on with this discussion. It will be whose constitution really do we have? Is it one by the nationalists of the federal judiciary, or can we ever get this back to we the people and really pay homage to and respect the 10th Amendment? I want to thank you all for listening today. I'm Suzanne Sherman, host of the Wasatch Report. This is the Renegade Ramblers Radio Network, 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers.